Hi everyone, again. So in this second panel discussion, the idea is to talk about cyber threats and how organizations can better protect themselves against such threats. Like the other panel, we will have some time as well for Q&A. I'll start with some introductions. So with us today, we have Dr. Stefan Buttigieg, resident specialist in public health medicine at the Ministry for Health. He's a keynote speaker and content creator, lectures at the University of Malta on digital health, social media and healthcare, and digital therapeutics, vice president of the European Public Health Association section on digital health, and is a governing council member of the World Federation of Public Health Associations. Robert Muscat, he's an information security specialist within the cyber defense and advanced operations section within MITA's security department, highly experienced in threat modeling, through which he assessed projects and adoption of technologies deployed in government IT systems. Maria Sapinska, she's a ventures manager at Accelerate, where she manages projects that bring deep tech disruptive innovation into the market. She's also the co-founder and director of NoID, a startup specializing in cybersecurity email solutions. With a background in regulatory and financial sectors, she previously led operational risk departments at prominent banks in the UK. Finally, we have Yeomans, Director of the Critical Infrastructure Protection Directorate within the Ministry for Home Affairs, Security, Reforms and Equality. He's the main point of contact within the Network and Information Systems Cooperation Group and one of the officers involved in the NIST transition into Maltese legislation. He's the member of the National Cybersecurity Strategy Steering Committee, which recently published the second Maltese Cybersecurity Strategy, and he's also the team leader of the National Computer Security Incident Response Team. Thank you all for being here. So both of you, like we're seeing from the other panels and even the other talks, new technology is always being researched and developed. Both of you, Robert and Matthew, must deal with critical systems and data, and over the years you must have seen the cyber threats landscape evolve. What do you see as the most prevalent cybersecurity threat that organizations are facing today? And what technical strategies and technologies should be adopted to protect organizations from such threats? Maybe Robert, you can.
So to start with, if we look at one of the common attacks that probably most of us have experienced or seen, if we start from phishing, phishing is currently being used immensely by what we call initial access brokers. So basically these threat actors, their main aim, and obviously their motivation is to harvest credentials so that they can either use them to perform more sophisticated attacks or basically to sell those credentials to other groups, for example ransomware groups, which can perform more sophisticated attacks. We are seeing a lot of threat actors in the initial access broker area, basically seeking much more credentials in relation to VPN and RDB credentials, which provide direct access to systems. And also, apart from using phishing to steal credentials, we're seeing also the use of credential stealer malware. What we are also seeing in terms of threat actors joining forces, so you have the initial access brokers, which their motivation is to harvest credentials. They are teaming up with groups such as ransomware groups so that they have actually very good clients to sell, and they team up and obviously operate together. Mentioning of phishing and tackling social engineering, business email compromise is always on the rise, and ESA's 2023 report marked a 10% increase in business email compromise. However, a new trend is also emerging, which is vendor email compromise. So most C-level, obviously officials, are more trained to look after their company emails being obviously stolen and used for financial gains by their peers. However, vendors are being targeted also, to obviously target these C-level suites, and we have seen a 3 times increase in the successful rate of actually these attacks occurring. The use of AI is also transcribing a lot of very good and articulating very good phishing emails. In some cases, the suspicion rate was much less than those written by humans. And if we see the most 2 prevalent attacks, as you well mentioned, basically you can start from ransomware. Although the payments in 2022 were less compared to other years, basically the ransomware groups, what they eventually did is they doubled the extortion. So basically, previously you would have to pay for the release of the data that has been encrypted. Now you will need to also pay for that information not to be publicly leaked. So they doubled up from that aspect. Traditional delivery of ransomware has shifted from email attachments to URL links. We have also seen ransomware used as a service. So you can actually buy these ransomware kits, which are ready-made by threat actors, and obviously you deploy them where you seek, obviously, that you need to gain financial gain. If we talk about DDoS, distributed, obviously, denial of service attacks, they are targeting more and more mobile networks and IoTs, obviously, because most of these IoTs, unfortunately, have poor security integrated in them. And there has been a prevalent increase in DDoS used as a smokescreen. So you would have the blue team, the security teams, which are focusing on restoring services after they've been hit by DDoS attacks. And obviously, other sophisticated attacks would be happening in the background. So DDoS would be used as a smokescreen to obviously cover more sophisticated attacks. I was also going to mention the aspect of supply chain attacks, which cannot go unnoticed. Supply chain attacks we have seen 61% of companies interviewed in ENISA's 2023 report have basically mentioned that they have been either directly or indirectly involved in software supply chain attacks. And obviously it is very unfortunate. We are also seeing a shift instead of vendors being targeted directly, suppliers which obviously work with big governments and obviously private companies, they are now targeting threat actors, managed service providers which obviously manage a lot of IT functions. If I can maybe conclude in the aspect of securing or protecting against obviously cyber attacks, I think it would be best to first preferably take a look at NIST cybersecurity framework, the 5 pillars: identify, detect, protect, respond, and recover. Major point would be to have a very good asset inventory, which dynamically updates itself, because what you cannot see, you cannot protect. So it would be futile to invest in technology, training, and obviously other features which can provide some kind of cybersecurity assurance if you obviously don't have the visibility on your assets. And last but not least, we tend to focus a lot on tools. Tools are very good. They will help us mitigate a lot of attacks and perform identification, but training is immensely important, especially because when you have business continuity, disaster recovery, and in this incident response plans, you need people on the ground to actually address and manage crises.
Thanks, Robert. Matthew, maybe you can take it a bit from the overall critical infrastructure and all that.
It's I think.
Hello? Okay. I would like to sort of continue what Robert was saying, but I would like to as well to demystify a bit into more easier example. I was happy during the presentation by Andre, he referred to Heartbleed, which is a very known vulnerability in cybersecurity. So, and that's I'm going to latch into it, explaining what are vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities basically are types of implementation within the code which can be used to misuse the code during the execution. And that is very common. So it's very easy for attackers or technical people to identify vulnerabilities. And for us, it's one part of major work that we operate in. Let me give you a practical example. When there was the famous Log4j, we had to understand, when it was published, we had to understand how it worked so that we had to create mitigation strategies and updates in order to prevent any misuse, computer misuse within the networks that we see and to the constituents that we share data with. And so basically, Leaf was cancelled at that point in time when that was announced, because for us it was a point of non-return that we needed to patch up quickly and fix and primarily understand how it works. Without being too much alarmist, I can easily say that there are a lot of vulnerabilities out there. It's not only related to encryption. Encryption is that vulnerability of Heartbleed was a case of not perfect implementation over OpenSSL. But it was one particular use case. There are hundreds of other. In fact, there are public registry on CVEs that we follow, and there are scales of measurements of these vulnerabilities. And PRISM will allow us to mitigate certain use cases, basically. But the threat is still present over there, and we know that these vulnerabilities are used, to create malware, basically, because malware at the end is not magical code, it's just code that uses vulnerabilities in order to perpetrate some criminal actions. But basically, most important aspect is that these are not meant purely only by advanced persistent threats by criminal groups to exfiltrate data and do ransomware, things like this. But we're seeing a new type of attacks, which we refer to them as hybrid threats, which are joint cyber attacks with something else. We're talking at this point in time like DDoS combined with some physical attack, or DDoS combined with leaks of information over the data set to create panic or create misinformation or disinformation on critical infrastructures. And when we refer to critical infrastructures, especially the protection of critical infrastructures, people think it's like we're protecting entities. It's more we're protecting essential services. So think about that you need your mobile phone, your telephone line in order to communicate with your friends and relatives. You need access to electricity, and you need access to all the other services that we define as essential services for the safeguarding of people's lives and Maltese democracy, basically. So protecting these infrastructures are key for us. And now we're in a phase that we notice that advanced persistent groups are combining their efforts. There may not be simply criminal organization, but state-sponsored as well, and focusing into something that we refer as hybrid campaigns, where they're combining cyber with other physical means of gaining an advantage over Maltese public entities or Maltese entities in general. So I wanted to keep it short, but focusing on actually not technical, but the aspect of the impact that cybersecurity or lack of cybersecurity really has. So thank you.
Thanks, Matthew. So in the face of these cyber threats and the technologies that are being developed to counter these threats, QKD is just one example. What usually triggers organizations to act and invest in technologies to increase their level of security? The quantum threat being one of them. And is there like an ideal way to approach it? Maybe Maria, from your experience within organizations, and Stefan from a more specific domain, which is the healthcare. You can take it.
Okay, so I can answer this question more from the banking and financial perspective. So what usually triggers it, I would say, in the best case scenario, what triggers is a change in regulation. So when you have amendments to the law and your regulation, then everyone panic, and there is a force to change something and put cybersecurity at the pedestal. In the worst case scenario is incident. Unfortunately, it's more often, and the incident, I'm saying like it's a leak of your customer data or your private company data. The consequences are huge, usually reputational damage, hefty regulatory fines, financial losses. And those are typical two examples of the reactive approach, which unfortunately is extremely common, and it's not very strategic, as we know. So the advice, and not even advice, but the proper approach shall be prepared, be ahead of the game, use the time when nothing is really going sideways to master your cybersecurity planning. And when you ask me about what's the best approach, obviously every organization will have their own approach, but there are certain rules which are kind of, I would always say they are like good to follow. So base and critical element and the base of the cybersecurity planning is risk assessment, but not as a cookie cutter approach that we just change the name of the company and use the same template with the same data for every organization or for different departments within the same organization. We just, it needs a proper brainstorming with all the stakeholders, plus it also needs deep dive to the technical controls which are already in the organization. And that's one element. And second element, and Robert already mentioned about it, I would say it's digital asset inventory. It's super challenging, no one likes it, it's not easy, but we have to know what we have. And when we have both of these elements, when we do this exercise of the digital asset inventory and we understand our risks, then we create a matrix around what is material for my company, for my organization, and what type of incident, event can affect it. And here this, I would say, it's a very good base for the message to the board. And now talking about the board. So that's a very good message to the board about answering 3 questions. First is like where we are in terms of our controls. Second, where our focus should be. And the third question is like, what's our roadmap? What's our roadmap to achieve the desirable goal? And while talking about the board, I would like to move probably to the last point, which is crucial because we are talking about decision maker in every organization. I would say that there are 2 points. So board needs to be trained to oversight cybersecurity. I'm not saying it needs to be trained in cybersecurity, it needs to be capable to oversight it. And second one, it has to be extremely well connected to the people in the organization or a team in the organization who determine what is material for the company. Because if Chief Information Security Officer cannot interface on the regular and mature basis with CEO what type of cyber risk in terms of business terms company is facing, then we are going back to the situation that this conversation will take place, but it will take place when the event or incident happens. And that's back to the reactive approach. So be prepared ahead of the game and you use exactly this time when nothing really happens. You still have time to prepare your organization for the future.
Maria? Sarah?
if I had to reflect a bit on all of this, and I think reflection is an important word. One of the things that we really don't do is sit down, have a look at what we have. And this in fact, I want to allude to what Maria is saying. Have a look at what we have and take action on that. So in health, we're still struggling with basic digital literacy. And it's not to be underestimated. We can have the best quantum technology. We can have the best, cyber security teams in the world. But if a certain health stakeholder leaves a specific unit with a USB at hand containing sensitive data, because it still happens, let's be frank about it, all right? We're still going to keep on having these threats. These are the basics. So we really need to remind ourselves that there are still basics to be tackled. That's one thing. Nevertheless, I have a lot of hope in European regulation. Maybe sometimes too much, but I think it's our best option, considering, our current landscape. And this is called the European Health Data Space. And one of the implementing aspects of the European Health Data Space is a secure processing environment. That means the idea of analyzing data, sensitive health data, on your own device or on a server, like on a server, let's say, that might not be properly secured, might not have the right specifications to deal with data, that might be a thing of the past. When we move more towards analyzing the data, processing data in a secure place, following specific requirements, following specific security parameters, and there the analysis is done on the data, and like this as well, we protect two main things. We protect data sovereignty, that means that the data doesn't leave the data holder, that's one thing. And secondly, we'll still get the outcomes that we need, because most probably there would even be sharing of best practices, something like sharing of analytical scripts. Instead of doing the same script like 3 times over, you do it just once in one place with all the health data that you need, and you bring out the output that you need. So this is like one vision. The other vision is the standardization of data as well. So this is going to happen, and I really have high hopes in it. I really think that it will push us even to tackle even the basics. But if I have to summarize, I think we need to focus on 4 main things: policy and regulation, which will inevitably drive a lot of work happening in different healthcare organizations. We need to think about training. That means that the healthcare professionals of the future need to be aware of cybersecurity, need to be aware, at least they have an idea, digital literacy, health literacy, and digital health literacy, bringing it all together. And then we have the idea of communication. That means that we need to build the necessary expertise within health to communicate the need to listen. Hey, this is the best practice to manage your data. This is the best practice to govern your structures. This is the best practice to set in place. And in fact, I'm very grateful for MITA, who support us multiple times during operations to really have high quality and secure operations. And last but not least, and this is really inspirational from a book I've read recently, Deep Work by Cal Newport, is the time to focus. We simply need to sit down and document our processes. Sit down and see what's happening and take action on that. Over to you.
Thank you, Stefan. I'm not sure if you have any remarks to say on what Stefan said. Just before we pass to questions and okay. Is there any questions for the panel?
Thanks. So the soon-to-be passed Cyber Resilience Act has a lot of implications for product liability on the digital market. And one of the interesting parts about it, and I'd love to hear your perceptions of this, is the so-called software bill of materials, which is a way to represent what the software component is made of, and how you think that can help us make better digital products.
Right.
So with regards to software bills of materials, obviously similar to what my colleague here said, It's not usually something straightforward, although there is a lot of automation and a lot of products which are tackling it nicely. To obviously have the wider perspective, especially with regards to supply chain risk management, of all software products, components, libraries, etc., etc. However, as I said before, it's obviously a critical need in today's world, because that's where you need to start to obviously address not only technical vulnerabilities, but even if we look at the NSA, the American National Security Agency, with regards to cryptography, there's also a recommendation. There's the commercial security CNSA, which basically basically requests companies to perform, which is called a cryptographical bill of materials. Why? Similar to what we do in SBOM, we need to have an inventory of all our products, libraries, etc., which make use of cryptographic controls, because only that way is how we will actually determine which products maybe already have PQC, as we mentioned before, allows them to integrate PQC with them. Allows crypto agility, something I'm not sure, haven't heard it yet, which basically determines how you shift from one crypto algorithm to the other without obviously performing a lot of, let's say, impact. And obviously, from there, you can only know which critical systems maybe have less transitioning to, at least at a minimum, to PQC algorithms, especially if they're critical, and obviously their product vendors at the current point in time don't even have a roadmap for that. So in my opinion, is first of all to invest in very good asset inventory, irrelevant if it's software, if it's cryptographical bill of materials. So this is the first step, to uncover your attack surface and determine the entry points.
Any other question?
So as Andre was saying, quantum computing is something which is coming. So besides the fact that the problem that store now, decrypt later, there is another problem, which is if, for example, tomorrow or in the next year or in the next 5 years, IBM or Quantinuum or any other hardware provider would say, listen, we're going to produce, I don't know, a 1000 qubit quantum computer. That's the problem, that you cannot change the infrastructure from day till the next day, you know? I mean, it's a very long process, and we see it every day with, for example, banks that have been with old operating systems, or with even other organizations, especially big organizations. The bigger, in my experience at least, the bigger the organization, the longer it takes them to change their internal policies. So what is industry like in banks, or what is the government doing in planning in order that the change happens? You know, I mean, I'm sure that there is no plan that tomorrow or next week you're going to change everything, but what is the plan? Is there a plan? Is there some sort of agenda in order that this happens and we say, oops, we're too late?
Listen.
Yeah.
Go for it, Matthew.
Yes and no. So basically, as our office, I can speak as our office and not the government. So as the regulator for the NIS implementation within the Maltese Islands. what we plan to do is, once we secure the funding for it, is that we plan to do a national cyber risk assessment. There have been a risk assessment in the past, but the focus on cyber was just one use case. Instead, we plan to have a national cyber risk assessment, always if the funds are allocated, because there's an issue of funds in that direction. In the meantime, we started in 2023 asking questions, simple questions to the operators. Do you have a risk assessment? Do you have a business continuity plan? Do you have an incident response plan? If you have an incident response plan, who are the guys who actually perform the incident response plan? Do they have a standard to work with? Did they undergo any standardization? Or, like, since I'm a CSERT guy, I'm always referred to the CSERT framework, the maturity assessment by NISA. So I'm looking into that direction. We've been rolling this for a couple of months and asking questions, responding emails, going back and forth, looking at the documentation. In the meantime, there is NIST tools coming. I chuckled a bit on when I was reading local newspapers, and there was a comment, somebody who wrote, I don't know who he is, but he's absolutely brilliant. NIST tool is coming, so I plagiarize it and say NIST tool is coming, because it changes a bit the responsibility, and it removes corporate veil in the sense that in a cybersecurity incident, it's not the company liable, but the board of directors. So it's really different, and this is something planned by the Commission. So we're not changing on doing something else, it's just implementing it as it is. And it won't apply to all Maltese companies, it will apply to some Maltese companies, which will fall under the criteria as defined in Article Schedule 2 and 3 of the NIS Directive, and then, of course, we're going to be explained within the transposition document which would fall. So basically, if you offer a number of services within Malta and within any other country within the European Union, right, you would do a self-assessment, whether you have to check whether you fall under this criteria, whether you're an essential entity or important entity. In case of essential entity, you need to provide before an incident that you are compliant. If you're an important entity, you need to provide you're compliant after an incident, so there is distinction between two. We think most likely between 80 to 400 entities in Malta would fall under that scope. So we are covering, so we're not protecting your small guy or small company, we're protecting companies that would have a very important scope, and they have actual services that are dependent on ICT infrastructure. You can easily identify and start look around it. You can make a list. It's half a day of work, basically. And sort of a plan there is. And I have to make a small adjustment to my discussion, because this is focusing on the NIS Directive. Aside from the NIS Directive, there is, as well as the National Cybersecurity Strategy, the new one, which covers until period 2026. And there are a lot of other directives that's being transposed. There is the DORA directive, or DORA regulation, sorry, which is focusing onto the financial institutions, and it has CISWEL protection of data centers, which provide services to financial services. So it's a bit of a complex. And there is as well as you rightly mentioned, the Resilience Act and other cybersecurity related directives as being proposed by the Commission. Something that I'm a bit worried, the issue that worries me most is the implementation aspect of these regulations. Primarily, for example, we mentioned about supply of equipment. Many manufacturers are outside the EU. Now, these regulations impose even on the suppliers. But there is a big question whether the suppliers have enough leverage on the manufacturers to provide the necessary amendments.
I think we have work to just close.
We're closed. That's it.
Just close.
Off to lunch. So that's closing the argument. My concern is how much the suppliers will have enough leverage so that the items being manufactured outside the EU will be compliant to EU legislation and EU regulations. It's a big question mark. We'll see what will happen. But laws are being drafted, directives are being made, so there is sort of an action plan as well through the strategy, and any strategy comes with its own action plan. So there is that kind of mentality to create something. We'll see in a couple of years' time whether how much implementation or how much actionability there was, but the discussion is being made and is being sort of prepared.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the people on the panel.